Welcome to Life by Design, episode 386. Welcome to Life by Design. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Horatio Jug.
Happy to be here as always.
Yeah, it's a great place to be, Horatio. With all the craziness going on in the world, at least we get to spend some time together and do these podcasts.
Yeah, well, we were spending time together doing podcasts before craziness happened in the world. So it's just nice. It's even nicer now, you know?
Yeah. Well, when you don't get to see as many people on a regular basis, I think we look forward to it even more.
That's true. That's true.
So we are creators of Life by Design with many locations worldwide. Each week on the show, we discuss the principles and the practice of Life by Design. Today, we're talking about structure. We're talking about the spine. We're talking about injuries to the spine and how those injuries documented tend to be a precursor to poor, what we call recoverability. And so just to give you a little context, for basically throughout the history of time, when you look at spinal injuries and then you compare those to future injuries, so let's use whiplash as an example or car accidents as an example. It's a very common source of a whiplash type injury. It's always been thought, especially outside of the corrective chiropractic realm, that pre-existing injuries or degenerative changes in the cervical spine really had no impact on your recoverability of the next injury. So essentially saying, look, it doesn't matter how injured you were before. It doesn't matter that there's signs of injury before. If you keep getting injured, the rate of recoverability should be the same in every single case over and over and over again.
So I actually think that it's worse than that. You're calling it that you've been injured. I don't even think that was like the language that they would use, you know, like these are the types of things when, you know, you would send some of your patients for films, you know, like the films would come back even now. This is even now. You could see, you know, thinning of discs. You could see osteophytes. I mean, these are signs of uneven wearing and tearing in the spine. Mm-hmm. And the radiologist would mark, you know, within normal limits. And I'm like, within normal limits, like, you know, because they don't have I think it's just a difference of well, here's the importance of philosophical differences, right? Mm-hmm. There's no symptomatology. There's no necessarily pain coming from this area, but this is a significant factor, right? This has lowered your potential for recoverability long-term.
For sure. And we send people to a Center for Structural Radiology. Of course, we do all of our own markings after we get the test back. I know lots of other corrective offices do both. They'll do their analysis and as well do the screenings. We separate those two. And so we get these case reports back from radiologists. And same thing, you know, we'll look at it and there'll be a significant loss in the curve. There'll be a change in the structure. There'll be lots of signs of, you know, pre-existing. And again, when we say injury, it doesn't necessarily mean it was an individual, you know, whiplash injury. And I think, you know, a lot of people assume that when we look at changes in the spine and the structure, you know, they think, well, I didn't have a car accident or I didn't have an injury. Injuries happen not just on a macro level, but they happen on a micro level. So, you know, excessive postural positioning, weakening of the tissues that allow structural change. Those are all in many ways injuries that accumulate over time. And really the take home here is that, you know, when we get these test results back, you know, they are signs of an adaptation to stress, whether it be an injury, whether it be macro, micro. The point is, you know, if you ever had a bone get injured and heal, I think every single, you know, health provider would accept that bone, albeit strong again, is less strong than it was before.
Sure.
So then apply that to this particular instance. You know, we're talking about future injuries. You know, I use the example in the pre-show of, you know, if you take two people, same size, same shape, even the same age, but their health levels are different. So if you could envision this and, you know, one had, you know, diabetes, was on a bunch of medication, didn't physically train their body, maybe had a series of injuries, and then another person who was fit, followed all the rules of the body, you drop both of them off a 10 or 20 foot building, you can't tell me that they're both going to come out the exact same just because they fell from the same distance.
Yeah, but that's what they've been saying with these types of injuries for a long time. It's just crazy.
Well, exactly.
That sounds so logical and so obvious, right? But yet, when applied in this realm, like it's just crazy that the same conclusion can't be reached.
Well, and that's it. So that's what this study looked at, Cratio. So tell us a bit about the study, and we'll talk about why we think that's important, what it confirms for us going forward.
Well, this is more for like, this is more for like people listening because,
Sure.
so like what they looked at was 121 people, which is, I mean, better size than normal for these studies. And the ones that had a pre-existing, mild degenerative or structural changes to the spine, 50% of those people did not recover from a car accident. Even a minor, what would be considered a minor fender bender was oftentimes really devastating for these people. And I know even in clinical practice, there's lots of people that have come in. The story is, well, I had a car accident 5-6 years ago, and my health has just been getting worse and worse. And of course, the doctors think, they're a malingerer or they're faking it or they're somehow right. Like, and I'm sure, I'm sure there's a percentage of people out there that are, but then there's always like another percentage of people who are, who hate being called those names and who are just trying to get better. And, it's nice to see some documentation and some evidence to support what you're feeling inside. If you're one of the people listening to this, that's frustrated by the fact that you haven't been able to recover.
Well, I think we can extrapolate this data as well, at least philosophically, to recognize that, how you take care of yourself, the injuries that you have, your level of health in general, to go back to the example of jumping off a building. I've always said this to patients, that all the things we're doing right now, you may feel the changes. There's things that are happening in your body where you may not feel the changes, but there's no way that all the things you're doing are not adding to a health bank account. They're protecting your ability to be healthy in the future, because there's no doubt that we're going to be exposed to stresses. There's no doubt that we're going to be prone to, experiencing some type of potential injury to the tissues of our body. And so every dollar you add to the bank account is stabilizing that bank account. So every good thing you do for your body, every time you have a great meal, every time you do a good workout, every time you have a checkup and corrected distortion, every time you have a good night's sleep, those things add up and they accumulate and they accumulate. And so, there's going to be those moments where you get exposed to a stress, whether it be individual or a series of stresses. Your ability to manage that stress and adapt to it, to not get injured, to not eventually get sick, to really live a healthy life in the future, depends on the things you do now. And while this study didn't look at that as in-depth as I'm saying, I think it's safe to say that that's an extrapolation that we could make, and a reason why people need to focus in on a healthy lifestyle, not just wait until they have a trauma. So they go and they have this accident in this example, or there's lots of other indications of, a time where a person got into a stressful situation, then they seek out help. And I think this just reinforces what we've been saying for 20 years, which is, doing the things now are setting the stage for the future.
Of course. The other thing we can easily extrapolate from this too is symptoms are important, but using your symptoms to justify whether you're healthy or not is a really poor decision, right? Like typically what happens after these accidents, it's like the assessment there on the spot. Mm-hmm. Hey, are you feeling okay? Yeah, my neck's a little bit sore. I feel okay. Okay, well, we don't need to do anything. You're free to go home.
Right.
And then this person never gets followed up on, right? So there's damage to the tissues that occurred during the accident on top of already damaged tissues. And now we've accelerated this negative process. However, the symptoms might not show up. And of course, this is documented in the literature too. The symptoms don't show up till 5, 6, 7, 10 years later.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, I see it all the time in practice. There's usually that initial set of symptoms where the body's in an acute state. And sometimes people will find their way in, but then what happens is the body's amazing. So the body adapts and it heals tissues to the best of its ability given the situation. But again, opening up the door to the conversation between what's optimal versus, what's enough just to get by and be symptom free. And so for, our listeners, recognizing that symptoms are not a good criteria for health, that objective testing, that measuring function, and having a lifestyle that supports meeting the requirements in all the aspects of life. And if you're doing that, so for example, if you're focusing on eating real food, if you're training, if you're paying attention to how you move, if you're having your spine checked and your nervous system examined regularly, you're going to be in tune with all these things. So if you do come up against a stress or a series of stresses, you'll at least have been having that system examine consistently enough to see that you're slightly off course. And, course correction over the long term is one of the most important components to people being successful, not just in health, but in every aspect.
Yep, totally agree.
Awesome, guys. So go to the show notes. You can check out the study, lifebydesign.com/podcast. Find today's episode. And as always, thank you for joining the drive to 1 million families worldwide living life by design.